Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
You are listening to an increasingly sort of, I don't know quite what the word is. I can't say that I'm embarrassed necessarily by how much I am learning as a result of these trade negotiations that aren't really negotiations at all, but the scale of my ignorance when I cast my vote on the most important political issue of my lifetime, the scale of my ignorance is actually quite hard to believe. I knew next to nothing. I knew, for example, that the Common Agricultural Policy and some of the fishing rights that we'd surrendered in return for economic boosts in other areas were the most vulnerable parts of support for the European Union membership. I knew that farms and fish were the areas in which it would be easier to argue that we had somehow got the dirty end of the stick, but only if you were myopic enough to pretend that none of the other areas of commerce existed. And when I started joking about how eventually it'll all be just people shouting fish, I was actually joking, because my understanding of the issue even then was a little bit trusting, I think. I can't pretend, and we're going to make a special effort today to have an informed and intelligent conversation about our national interest. This is not going to be one of those days where we sort of high-five each other about how easy it is to pull apart even the most convinced of Brexiters on actual detail and facts, because there's no joy in that for me anymore. There's no pleasure in that for me anymore at all. It feels a little bit like bullying, to be honest with you, because it's not their fault. They know so little. Yeah, that of course sounds condescending, patronising and sneering, but there comes a point where people who don't know anything, insisting that they know everything, have to be slightly patronised or condescended. It's why I'm so keen to stress this morning, first, early doors, I can't believe how little I knew. If you told me, for example, and I'll get this right because it's a number, and numbers are one of the few things we can at least file under indisputable. 75% of fish caught in the UK is exported, mostly to the European Union. The majority of fish eaten here is imported, which is, of course, less pertinent to this conversation, because if we do more fishing, we could import less. But the fact that 75% of the fish caught here is exported is the reason why the European Union yesterday said, if you want to be able to trade freely and have no tariffs in all of these areas, then we're going to have to keep things as they are with regard to fishing as well, because that was the give and the take. That was the quid and the pro and the quo. But fingers in ears, blindfolds on, start shouting, fish. And it really has come to that now. I can't quite believe it. It was funny up until, even a fortnight ago? If I'd end a call with someone and I'd go, fish passports, blue passports, fish, and there was literally nothing else at the time that we could have filed under tangible benefits. And now it's come true. I might have a little experiment and start predicting things that I want to happen rather than things that I don't want to happen, but I'm pretty sure will. The negotiation is the first time that the European Union have essentially conceded that they are prepared to take an economic hit. And it's not out of some sense of sort of supranational masochism. It's because I do think we've got to start finding areas where we can all agree, or maybe not all. If we take the 10% on both extremes, the 10% who would stay in the European Union even if we all had to wear hair shirts and start flogging ourselves at 6 o'clock in the town square, and the 10% who sadly are prepared to sacrifice the economic health of a nation upon the altar of a blue passport that they could have had anyway. We have to leave them out of the debate now. Unfortunately, I mean, the leading Brexit campaigners in Parliament, the Duncan Smiths and the Rees-Moggs and the like, they are in that mad 10%. I don't know anyone in the mad pro-EU 10%. I genuinely don't. I don't know anyone who would say we must stay in at all costs. It's the customs union and the single market departure that divides people, and it shouldn't. As the European Union tried to explain yesterday, as Donald Tusk tried to explain yesterday, what they're doing is seeking to apply established rules to our departure, even though applying the established rules will in the short term harm them, possibly in the long term as well. It wouldn't harm them as much as breaking the rules. Do you see? So we have to sort of see it as an entity. The pre-Maastricht entity was a single market. We invented it. Margaret Thatcher effectively invented it. For many people, it was her most important economic legacy. It overshadows a lot of the things that trip more easily off the tongue from her premiership. But we invented the single market. And one of the key conditions of that invention was to make it impossible to break the single market. You can't enjoy its benefits without meeting its responsibilities. I'm on a journey. Look, if I'm getting any of this wrong, then help me out. But I can't see any benefit at all in joining the ranks of people now who are saying either, oh, it doesn't matter, or pretending that things aren't looking bad, because that is how you leave the door open for the mad 10% to come steaming through and turn us into a kind of, well, a very weird and backwards looking country. What do you get in return for being weird and backwards? Well, you get a blue passport. So we invented the single market. We persuaded our European Union partners to join it with us, to help us build it. It contains a whole system of rules, irrespective of the political union that began with the Maastricht Treaty. The rules that bind the single market could be loosely distilled down to, if you touch it, you have to buy it. You can't break it. You can't say, I like that bit, and that bit, but I'm not getting involved in that bit. That's why it's called a single market, not a multiple market, not a slightly different market for every member. It's a single market in which everybody obeys the established rules. And the Donald Tusk speech yesterday almost appeared to sort of address a constituency that I don't find anymore in this country, the constituency of people who can still see quite clearly. He said, I fully understand and respect Theresa May's political objectives to demonstrate at any price that Brexit will be a success and was the right choice. That's the bit where I get confused. The at any price. Why at any price? But of course, he adds, I'm sorry, this is not our objective. This is a speech in Luxembourg. No member state is free to pick only those sectors of the single market it likes. So, for example, the fishing rights is part of the single market framework. So if you want to enjoy tariff-free trading with the single market, you have to keep obeying the rules that were established when it was set up. I think you do. I can just about see an argument that I think they're being a bit political. I think they know the ludicrous weight that's been placed on the fishing industry in the context of our broader economy, and they are kind of using it to force May's hand. But if we're exporting 75% of our landed fish largely to the EU, and we want to carry on doing so without paying a tariff at the border, I can't see how we can really argue we should carry on. We should be able to carry on as normal with our fishing trade, but you're not allowed to carry on as normal with yours. I don't know. I genuinely can't believe that it's come true. I still was sniggering, probably last week, because people started texting and tweeting me. It became a bit of a thing, a bit of a joke when you hear one of these so-called gammons talking about imaginary mythical gains. You sort of became quite amusing just to distill it all down to the word fish, which is what it is. But it's come true now. It's incredible. It's genuinely incredible. Who do we want to talk to today? Business people? People who actually export? Or the rest of us who are still a little bit dazed? I don't want any real arguments today. The only circumstances in which we'll have a bit of a Barney is if you say things that are demonstrably untrue. And I accept that it's very, very hard now to argue that this is a good thing without saying things that are demonstrably untrue. And I accept also, in the spirit of absolute openness and fairness, it's quite frustrating for people who ring this programme to be held to account in a way that other programmes and other journalists and presenters don't hold the actual professionals to account. So somebody like Nadine Dorries or Ian Duncan Smith or Jacob Rees-Mogg can speak demonstrable nonsense. Jacob Rees-Mogg tweeting an article that even The Sun has been forced to withdraw for being an absolute pyramid of piffle. But he hasn't, last time I checked, he hasn't removed it from his account. So he's happy to continue knowingly to mislead his fans. And then, of course, someone rings this programme from Basingstoke and they've believed the nonsense that's been poured into their ears by these charlatans and spivs. And they end up getting embarrassed. When really, I would rather confine the embarrassment to the snake oil salesman rather than the snake oil purchasers. Where are your milestones? WhatsApp exchange when Nadine Dorries said, well, I don't understand what the customs union is at all, but I'm having quite a lot of arguments about it with people, so could someone fill me in? Someone fills her in and she says, oh, it's very complicated. Oh, I'm really glad we're leaving. So her grounds for leaving the European Union, with respect, and I say this slightly reluctantly, her grounds for leaving the European Union essentially are that she's too stupid to understand what it is. And it seems to me that we're all there now. We were all a bit too stupid or ill-informed to understand what it was and what it did. So we got a reality check yesterday. It's a reality check that hasn't bitten quite as deeply as it would have done if there hadn't been a state-sanctioned assassination attempt on the streets of Salisbury. That at least is the current belief of our security services. It would be biting rather harder. I don't know what's going to happen now. I've got a horrible feeling, well, that either we're going to sign a free trade agreement that is the first free trade agreement in history that would leave signatories less free to trade than they were before. Again, I'm hoping to challenge on that if you can think of another one. But we're going to sign a free trade agreement. They say it'll be like Canada, but Canada started from a point of having no trade agreement with the European Union. So Canada signed something that is better than having nothing. We've currently got everything, and we're going to sign something that is slightly better than having nothing, or even a lot better than having nothing. But we've already got everything. Do you see why I'm getting so worried now? Because logic and understanding seem to have just been completely kicked out of the window. And for 18 months... some of us have been saying, I can't see, and maybe we could have said it in a more polite way, but there's so much vileness coming from the other side. Enemies of the people, crush the saboteurs, traitors. It's quite hard sometimes not to swing back. Some of us have been saying for 18 months, I don't see how this ends, except with relative disaster. And now it's coming true. I'll tell you what we'll do. Persuade me that it isn't. Persuade me that there are still reasons to be cheerful. If you can, I will make a promise that I'll try not to monster you if you don't deserve it, and you make a promise not to use empty soundbites, meaningless slogans, or demonstrable untruths. How could anyone today be cheerful? How could anybody who voted Remain feel anything other than really disappointed that the hope that some silver lining would eventually appear has now disappeared? And how can anyone who voted Leave, except people who actually want to be poorer, because you think that Johnny Foreigner is going to be hurt even more than you are by this? How can anyone be cheerful by what happened yesterday is staggeringly awful. But of course, we still rely upon a print media that is duty-bound to pretend that it isn't. And what's the new test on this programme? When you're struggling to understand why anybody would be doing something so obviously injurious, ask yourself what a completely amoral billionaire would do. Because if it's going to be good for them, you can be pretty confident that it's going to be bad for everybody else. And it is a different flavoured attempt today to find things to just cheer up those of us who are now pretty much completely persuaded that we're doing something really daft. Everything Donald Tusk said yesterday could have been and was predicted 18 months ago. You can't do this, you can't do that, and there are no circumstances in which being out of the club can be better than being in it. But we're determined to leave, to become the first ever signatories to a trade agreement that renders a country less free to trade with the people they're signing the treaty with than they were before. I can't believe those words. Anyway, you're going to cheer me up today, and I'm not going to argue with anyone. Dean's in Oxford. Dean, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I wonder... I'm a little bit concerned, actually.
Well, you're supposed to be cheering me up.
I'm disabled.
Yes.
And I rely on the European medical card.
Right.
I have to book into a hospital when I go and see my son and grandchildren in Germany.
Yeah.
Just in case I get taken ill.
So you were one of the few people that perhaps fully understood the value of the European medical card.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know thousands of people, literally thousands of people, that are disabled because I'm on the forum.
Yes.
And they're all of the concern that they go to Europe, and what we've discovered is that my particular condition would cost me £700 medical insurance for a week.
This was. I do remember people talking about this prior to the referendum. I think it got drowned out by all the Project Fear noise. Can I ask how you voted?
I voted Remain, James.
Okay, because you knew that this was on the cards.
Well, I've got a son who works in Germany, and I've got grandchildren in Germany, and it will make it more difficult for me to go and see them. Basically.
I hope that that your fears are unfounded, but I can only apologise for not having the knowledge to
No, it's okay.
reassure you.
It was drowned out, basically. It was mentioned once, because I've been listening out for it, and it's only been mentioned once in all this time. My fears are that £700 for a week on medical insurance, because we've been looking round.
Yes.
And it would make it just impossible for me to go. I mean, I'm disabled and I'm a pensioner.
Yeah.
And I don't have that kind of money to put up front, because that's what I would have to do.
Yes.
And the European medical card gives me like emergency cover, you know.
And how much do we know about the likelihood of it being retained? Because I know that she asked, one thing they didn't dismiss yesterday is remaining in agencies on medicine, aviation, and chemicals, but that doesn't cover. No, that doesn't cover you. But this is an example of why I mean, that's why I asked you how you voted, because I'm embarrassed by how little I knew when I had the arrogance to put a cross in a box in June 2016. Arrogance is a bit harsh, maybe, but you know.
Well, I mean, I knew about. I was worried about the medical card, which was one of the reasons.
Yes.
But the other reason is, my son is in Germany, and he's worried now about his position. He's been worried for the last sort of 18 months because he don't know what will happen if we leave and we don't get an agreement on the people. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, and oddly, both Brussels and London, Brussels and Westminster, currently appear to be using people like your son, or forgetting about them altogether. And the European Parliament is the body that is agitating to protect their interests. And by that, obviously, I don't mean the ones that we send to that institution. Dean, if I find out any good news, I'll pass it on to you, mate. But otherwise, just hang in there.
And this is the first time I've been able to get through to you.
Well,
God knows how long.
We'll give you the secret number so that you get straight through next time. There isn't a secret number. It's 25 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean it. I genuinely do. I'm not going to fight with anyone who doesn't try to lie to me today. I just want reasons, and obviously that wasn't one of them, reasons why this isn't a really bad day for Britain, when finally everyone has to admit that all we're doing now is shouting fish at each other. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. John's in Wallington. John, reasons to be cheerful.
Hi, James. How are you?
Well, I've been pretty clear on that already for the last 26 minutes.
James, I'm going to be very frank with you. I voted leave, and I voted leave for one reason, and one reason alone. My fear for the last 5 to 10 years has been for my children's future in this country. And I honestly don't believe, and nobody knows, nobody knew the details of Europe and our country and the intricacies of it. And
I think some people did, but they were the ones that we all ignored, wasn't it?
Well, I don't think properly, because it wasn't explained very well to anybody. Nobody gave me a reason. That my fundamental belief is that this country couldn't cope with the volume of European nationals coming to this country.
It's a smaller sum than non-European nationals. You knew that, did you?
Yes, I did know that.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a government decision not to implement more robust.
Well, exactly right, and that's where the government have let us down, because it's
Successive government.
Yeah, no. Agreed, James. Agreed, and that's the honest truth. If I even knew they had the ability to do that, and I didn't.
Nor did I. I've got 20/20 hindsight on this. I'm about 80% sure I didn't realise prior. Otherwise, I suspect I'd have been shouting it from the rooftops. But I was still working at the BBC, John, and trying to be all impartial.
but I think this is the problem. I think this is where the government and successive governments have let us down, because I don't think the Brexit vote would have won had the government come back and said, look, we realise that this is a big issue for many people. We can actually do something about this.
But do you know why they didn't? This is where you and I disagree with each other, and I would with characteristic arrogance, John, I'd insist that I actually have the facts on my side. The reason why the government didn't do it is that they knew it would be economically injurious. European Union migration, in particular, is a net gain to the UK Treasury. Not only do we need the money to sustain an increasingly old and fragile population, but we also need the bodies to come in and do the stuff that are just the simple jobs of looking after them. So I've said I'm not going to argue with anybody today, and you've managed to build your whole castle on immigration without sounding remotely racist. But
No. I'm not, James.
I know.
The point of it is, if the government could then, let's be fair, over the last 20 years, we've not built enough houses. My issue is that my children, where are they going to live?
The reason they've not built enough houses, we worked it out on Monday, because they by not building houses, they drive up the price of the houses that they do build. So you end up with Theresa May on Monday having to beg house builders to stop pursuing profit and to start selling more houses for less money. This is why these words that none of us really understood fully, words like neoliberalism, the idea that putting profit ahead of absolutely everything else, that explains why they haven't built more houses. If you had 10 people trying to buy 10 houses and someone gave you the chance to blow up 2 of them, you'd have 10 people trying to buy 8 houses. The price would probably go higher than it would have done when you had 10. That's why they've done it, and we've let them. And people like you, with love and respect, you're blaming expats for it.
No, I'm not. I'm really not
kind of
blaming expats for it. No, I'm not, because I'm not worried about the people that have left the country to move to Europe.
No, I just set a little trap for you there. By expats, I meant immigrants, but we don't call them immigrants if they've left Britain to go to Europe. We call them expats, whereas I'm thinking of all the French and the Polish and the Spanish and the Italian expats.
No, but listen, James, I work in construction. Yeah, and I work alongside these people, and I'm fully aware of what we need and what we require because we've stopped training people, we've stopped apprenticeships. Young people now don't learn.
Why have we stopped apprenticeships, John?
Well, because everything's gone into education, isn't it? And it's about money.
Because if you're running a construction firm and you have to spend a little bit of money on training someone, or you can divvy it up among shareholders, what are you going to do?
Well, exactly right.
So we're back to the house building. It's always, think of the amoral billionaires. What do they want? And actually the flow of, this is Jeremy Corbyn's attitude to the freedom of movement. He argues that the flow of bodies into the country actually allows them to not train, not do apprenticeships, but strong trade unions could insist on apprenticeships, and they could collectively bargain for higher wages and better working conditions.
So what we're actually agreeing to say at the moment is, over the last 20 years, we've ruined this country.
Over the last 20 years, what?
We've ruined the country. We've gone down.
Well, it doesn't feel ruined to me, although I live quite a privileged and rarefied existence. I was in an NHS hospital earlier this week. It doesn't feel ruined to me, but I appreciate for an awful lot of people it does. And the people who've ruined it, I'm not going to lay this at your door, John, because it wouldn't be fair, but the people that ruined it love the sound of you blaming it on EU migration. They love it. Seriously, they'll be chinking their anti-elitist glasses together at the sound of an honest British working man describing a country brought to its knees economically in many ways, the so-called left behind, blaming it on the utterly, utterly innocent others. I'm sticking by my promise, even though some of you think I should be indulging a little bit more of my finely tuned anger. I'm not going to get angry with anyone, John. John was a lovely bloke. A lot of you picking up on that. And yet, someone who worked in construction persuaded that immigration and a housing shortage was a closer relationship than the construction industry and a housing shortage. Lisa responds to him by saying, I feel sorry. John seems like a decent bloke, even though he thinks all the problems in this country are down to me, my husband and my kids. And people like us, I would still go for a pint with him. I guess I'll tell you where I am now, analogy fans. I am now accepting that the house is burning and just hoping we can save as much as possible. And that, it seems to me, was pretty much the flavour of Theresa May's Mansion House speech. But unfortunately, it's not us that get to decide what we can and can't save. But in many ways, it's the European Union who we now have to ask to help us minimise the damage we're doing to our own house, while the arsonists continue to run around high-fiving each other and talking about unaccountable elites. 10:39 is the time. I don't know where the morning's gone. I'll stay with this for as long as you want me to. Edward is in Luton. Edward, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hello, James. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Edward.
Right, hi there. Good to speak to you at last. I've rang in a few times. I wanted to take you to task on this question about the economic hit that you continually press on about regarding what the UK has lost with regards to this exit of the EU. And I'll set the stage by saying that I am an importer. I've taken a huge hit, and I do employ a Polish worker as well. Okay?
How huge a hit have you taken?
Well, an enormous hit. I mean, probably 30 or 40% of my revenue has gone. But
okay.
Can I start with
30 or 40%?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now,
and you voted to leave, did you?
My life, James, is not based on how much money I've got only.
No,
okay?
no, you're very lucky. Nor's mine. But
No,
a lot of people can't think about anything else.
Yes. And Mohammed bin, can I give you an analogy because you're a fan of it? Okay?
Yes.
Mohammed bin Salman has been feted by the Queen and the establishment elite, and signing 150 billion pound deals for our arms and weapons, which, by the way, our German neighbours have refused to do.
Yes, I'm going to hurry you slightly. There are a lot of people waiting.
It enriches us.
Yes.
It enriches us. Okay, it enriches all of us. Okay, and that's the reason why we've done it, because it enriches us. But
we should start dealing heroin then.
Well, no, I for one would gladly give up the sale of our Typhoon jet, which enriches BAE and the other systems, if it meant that children weren't continuing to be crucified or people weren't continuing...
Mate, I would as well. With respect, Edward, we did this on yesterday's show. I've got a full switchboard. I appreciate that you've struggled to get through in the past, but you're here now. Don't blow it. What's the point you want to make?
Right, the point I want to make is, along with lots of other European partners and lots of other European regions, the reason why the populist vote has risen in Italy and Germany and here, the reason why is because large swathes of the countries have been left behind, and the elite and the establishment, a la people who have lots of money...
Like the blokes who own the Telegraph and the blokes who own the Ritz and the bloke who owns the Times and the people that run the Mail and the people that own the Express, all of those pro-Brexit elitists.
And so-called Christian Liberal Democrat elite.
Yeah, mate, I'm really sorry, but I'm not learning anything from you at all. Reasons to be cheerful. Go.
Lots of those people in those large areas, like the north of England, Wallonia in Belgium, lots of areas are much happier at the prospect and the thought that there is going to be real change. There may be real change.
Why? Very briefly, Edward, give me your favourite example of the real change they're going to see.
Possibly, it might...
No, not possiblies, the certainlys.
You deal in possibly.
But I've got no reasons to be cheerful. You have. What are they?
Certainly, they have been listened to and have the prospect of being listened to.
What's going to improve in their lives?
I would imagine it's a possibility in the future that they will be listened to rather than left behind. Because
so what's going to improve in their lives?
The rise of fascism will occur again.
Oh, okay. It already is, mate, but it's rising among people who can't answer this question. Last chance, Edward. I'm not going to argue. Edward.
So you don't want to listen to them. You want them to remain the same. You want them to have the status quo. You want unelected officials in Europe to continue to govern the whole of Europe.
I don't know. Do you remember at the introduction when I said, let's avoid the empty slogans, let's avoid the meaningless soundbites, let's concentrate on demonstrable evidence? Mate, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm sorry. I'm not. No, I'm not, Edward. I'm not going to argue with you because I've set the parameters of the conversation. You give me reasons to be cheerful. You use words like possibility, imagine, left behind, far right, populist. I'm talking about the pound in the pocket. You can take a 34%, 30 to 40% hit to your revenues and keep bouncing along. I'll tell you now, you patronise the people in the communities you describe when you imagine, even implicitly, that they could take a 30 to 40% hit to their already paltry income and be anything other than poverty-stricken. They'll have a voice. They'll have a voice, mate, but they won't have a pot to pee in. It's 10:43. Alex is in Leon C. Alex, reasons to be cheerful.
I don't think there are any reasons to be cheerful. I am a former member of UKIP, Leave campaigner, and I organised an event around fishing.
Gosh.
And over the last 9 months, I've completely changed my position. And I think we should now ideally stay in the European Union. And it's kind of embarrassing. I watch on a daily basis just how badly the British government is handling it.
You break my heart, mate, because I kind of need people like you to come out, with respect to the last fella, who really couldn't have been flimsier if he'd set out to be the king of flimsy land. I hope that people like you could sort of school people like me, could still give people like me maybe just a little slap, a little reality check, and say, yeah, all right, that's that, and that is bad. But what you forget is this, and the fella who's organised a fishing-based, as a UKIP member, a fishing-based protest to turn around and say, I've realised it's all a horrible mistake. That makes me want to punch someone, Alex. Not necessarily you, but it makes me very, very sad.
Well, I think at the beginning of the Brexit process, there may have been an opportunity then to come up with something meaningful, but
we could have done, but not once the red lines were established. I think that the people who were fine with the European Union until Maastricht, that political union, was the breaking point for them. I think my old mate Bill Cash falls into that category. I know that David Allen Green, one of the best tweeters on the subject, he very much does as well. But as soon as she laid down the red lines, the customs union single market red lines, and you had people in your party insisting that we'd be able to be like Switzerland and Norway, but as soon as it was announced that we were leaving the customs union and the single market, they started pretending that they'd wanted and promoted that all along. You've been conned more than anyone else has, Alex.
Probably, yes. But maybe a couple of years ago I should have engaged my brain a little more.
We can all say that. What do we do now? Where do we go? Because, I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but it infuriates me that you don't get held accountable for what you have done.
Yes, well, I think the best thing now would be the opportunity to have a general election or a vote now that...
And then we could end up with Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, which means any small corners of the listenership to this programme who haven't already been upset or offended by something I've said, we've now gone unanimous, because I don't want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister, and that's what will happen now. And it's your fault.
Yes.
We can still laugh. How commonplace is your position among your former mates?
Well, I think a lot of people are disenfranchised, but
yes.
What I still find concerning is there are a large number of people who think we're heading for sunny uplands.
Still?
Oh, yeah. Apparently we're Treasure Island, and the EU is going to be massively hit.
And I guess I've forgotten his name, but the last fella on before you would be in that category, just insisting that these, I mean, the soundbites are running out. We're talking about fascists in Italy being evidence that leaving the European Union is a good idea. It's nuts. What about fish, though? Actually, I'm late. Very briefly, why on the fish issue, which is all that your former colleagues in UKIP are left with now? How did we get that so wrong?
Well, I mean, the European Union has shafted quite a lot of fishermen in this country.
So you can put it like that. I would argue now that we did actually surrender on that front as the price we paid for all the gains we made on other fronts.
Yes, and it's going to be surrendered again in the upcoming negotiations for free trade or whatever.
If we want to continue exporting 75% of the fish landed here to largely the European Union. It seems a fairly straightforward quid pro quo, that. I'm not going to... I'm actually... Shall we hug it out? Shall we shake hands and part as friends?
Okay. Yeah.
Seriously, I mean it, because it does infuriate me, and I do think people, and forgive me, I don't like the phrase "like you," but you've described yourself pretty clearly as a former UKIP member who organised an event around fishing and now wishes that we could just get in the DeLorean and go back in time. I have to start creating a space in which people like you feel comfortable saying what you've just said to me, and I can't do that if I now start shouting at you. Where we are wondering, I suppose, where the good news lies, the things that will be demonstrably better than they are now, the tangible benefits. Because yesterday's announcements by Donald Tusk seem to acknowledge, as Theresa May, I believe, and I am bending over backwards to acknowledge the possibility of being wrong, I believe Theresa May and Donald Tusk have both now conceded that this is going to damage us both economically. The European Union's interests are easy to understand. You can't have an institution built upon rules without enforcing those rules, and what they're trying to do now is enforce previously unused rules regarding how member states leave, and they accept that that is going to involve some negative impact upon their members, their economies, but I still don't know, because, and I'll tell you why I don't know what we're supposed to get out of it. All the people that said it would be a good idea have turned tail. David Davis, exact same benefits. Liam Fox, easiest deal in history. You know? And the list goes on. We can be like Norway, we can be like Switzerland, and you end up in this incredible place, intellectually, where the people on the Remain side of the argument, who argued that we'd have to leave the customs union and the single market if we left the European Union. It's not necessarily true if you look at EEA and EFTA, but the people who argued that, people on the other side now are saying, they told you, so you can't pretend you didn't know, while they were arguing largely, not exclusively, but they were arguing largely that we'd be able to have the exact same benefits. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. 10:54 is the time. Marcus is in Westminster. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I'm in Westminster because I'm MP for Yeovil in Somerset.
Welcome.
Hi. And I just thought it would be great to call in because I respect your show and what you do, and I think you're a really good journalist and able to engage with facts.
Is there a big butt coming, Marcus?
No. Actually, there isn't. So I was encouraged by the sort of tone of the start of your programme, which I listen to quite often, to sort of try to have a rational sort of a conversation about... Well,
let's crack that. With respect, let's crack on with it, because I wouldn't want people to think MPs got special treatment or extra time.
So basically, I was in the US and Canada with the International Trade Committee the week before last.
Yes.
And it was interesting. I examined Greg Hans, who's the trade minister in our committee yesterday, and one of the things that I was pointing out was that some of the numerical assumptions that people have been making about, effectively they've been saying how little benefit there will be to the UK economy of potentially doing trade deals around the rest of the world, just don't really stack up when you look at the numbers behind them.
But they have to be better than what we've currently got, don't they?
Well, look, it's
No, I won't look. They just do, because in order to persuade people to do something, you have to persuade them that they'll end up in a better place than where they started. And you don't need me to remind you that Donald Trump's just announced a trade war.
Well, my position has always been that net things in the medium term would be effectively around the same as where they are now. You know,
what about in the short term?
Some things will be a bit less than they were before, and other things will be more.
Would it be unfair of me to ask? Hang on a minute. Can you refer me in any way to pre-referendum pronouncements when you said things will be worse than they were before in some areas?
So when I made a speech in the House of Commons before the vote, I was very careful to set out the net effects. There were some positives and some negatives.
But these would be economic impact assessments, wouldn't they? So where are things going to be worse?
Actually, economics. A lot of it wasn't economic.
Well, we're talking. Listen, I don't want this to get fractious because I am short of time. But I'm looking for reasons to be cheerful, and saying that we can do more trade with a country that's just announced a trade war is. I mean, it's low on my dial of cheerfulness.
For example, the Aussies, when they did their free trade agreement with the US, they vastly underestimated what that would be worth to them. They've actually seen their trade increase by 50%.
But you lead me again to the question of how that is going to be better than what we've currently got. I mean, we can talk over each other until the cows come home, but
it'll make up for any extra costs of what we do with the EU.
You do know that Australia is on the other side of the world and the European Union has a land border with the United Kingdom.
It's also a long way from the US.
Yes, it is, but we're not the US, and the US was never in the largest single market in the world, and we're leaving it, you say, to benefit from being able to trade with Australia while diminishing our ability to trade with Germany.
So just to give an example, the 0.2%, which the Treasury has said is what the potential value of doing a deal with the US might be, is about $5 billion.
Yes, and in the context of the European Union?
Well,
your own government's impact assessment. Your own government's impact. Oh, okay.
The insurance market in the US writes over $1 trillion of business every year. That's just one sector.
That's because they don't have a health service.
There is huge opportunity.
That's because they don't have a health service.
Health is actually a pretty small proportion of that. There's a lot more in the property.
So, okay. I'm grateful for the call. If I was to annotate what you've told me, and I am insisting that you obey the same rules as everybody else who rings the programme, reasons to be cheerful, you've given me Australia's trade deal with America being a bit better than they expected, or even a lot better than they expected. I don't want to put that words in your mouth. That's what you've got, Marcus Fish, MP for Yeovil.
One example, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Have a great day. What do you do now? Elected members of Parliament, look, we're walking away. Both sides now concede. His own Prime Minister concedes it's going to do us economic damage. Where are the pluses? Well, America signed a trade deal with Australia and it's gone a bit better than some people predicted. What are we going to do? We're moving out of the largest single market on the planet. I don't know, I suppose the silver lining would be you could almost detect in his voice a knowledge of how ridiculous he was sounding. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. MP's always welcome to ring in, but no more welcome than you or you or you. I don't know if I can carry on with this, actually. I'll give you the number. If you really want to carry on with it and have something interesting to say, call me. 0345 6060 973. Viva Australia, where we struggle and continue to struggle to come up with reasons to believe things will be better. And I was frustrated by the conversation with that MP for Yeovil before the news, because they didn't say before the referendum that things will be worse in any ways. Nobody said that. Exact same benefits is what David Davis said. And I don't buy the idea, nor do most. Obviously, esprit d'escalier is very easy to achieve, but you'd struggle to find a consensus in Australia that the deal they struck with America, it took 15 months to write, was an unalloyed good for them. But even if it was, the idea that leaving the largest single market in the world will render us better off by dint of a trade deal with Australia, who I think have already said that they would prioritise a trade deal with the European Union over us. I'm going to say that if an elected MP is still really sounding no more informed or optimistic than my average callers, it's the most wonderful endorsement yet of my refusal to invite, or my reluctance to invite people onto the programme as special experts, because they don't actually know anymore. They're just a little bit more fluent, perhaps, and glib. But fair play to the fella, Marcus Fish, for picking up the phone and ringing in. And if it turns out that we can sign a deal with Australia that will plug a significant proportion of the holes left in our international trade by leaving the European Union, then so be it. Still going to look for a few more reasons to be cheerful. We've got Mystery Hour coming up at 12. Do you want to hear a mad conspiracy? Are you in the mood for a really mad conspiracy? No? All right, I may save it until later in the programme. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the question I will insist that you answer is, what is going to be better? And the Australian-American deal has gone quite well, isn't really, with respect to my honourable friend, an answer to that question. Paul is in Gretna. Gretna Green.
Morning, James.
Hello, Paul. What's on your mind?
I think you've ignored the key demographic who led the charge for Brexit, because they've got a positive coming their way. If you happen to be a multi-millionaire tax avoider, then leaving the EU means we avoid taking on the EU tax avoidance directive that comes out in March.
Do you know, when this first got this is yet again, I don't know if you were listening at the very top of the show today when we sort of described the ignorance with which I walked into the voting booth, and I obviously cast my vote to Remain, but it was by no means as clear a decision as it would be today. I didn't know stuff. So when this first started appearing, Paul, this claim that the easiest explanation as to why extremely wealthy people, whether they happen to own newspapers or hedge funds, are in favour of something that makes so little sense to the rest of us, I thought this was some sort of red herring or conspiracy.
Well, 80% of the media is owned by 6 people.
No, I know that. But this notion that their attempts to clamp down on tax avoidance informs... I tell you why I disagree with you as it being the reason why they did it. Because they've been doing it for 30 years, and the announcements on tax avoidance are relatively recent.
This is true, but...
They've been doing it since Boris Johnson arrived in Brussels as the Daily Telegraph correspondent and got more what we would today call clicks by filing rubbish about bananas than he did about filing reality. That's when everything changed. And that was years, decades before anybody mentioned tax avoidance.
Well, what led me to the conclusion was a graph I'd seen on somebody's Twitter feed.
Yes.
That just posted the number of anti-EU stories in the mainstream media.
Yes.
And at the date that the tax avoidance measures were announced, there was a huge spike in anti-EU stories, and it carried on that way.
And now that the reality should be biting, the reason why these newspapers won't respect their readers' livelihoods and admit that they've made a terrible mistake, then your theory kicks in, doesn't it? Because they don't want to go back on this, even though it's going to be bad for all of their readers, because it is arguably going to be good for them.
Absolutely. I mean, I forget who said it, but politics is just like any other crime. If you want to know who did it, just follow the money.
I'll tell you who said it. It was Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire.
Was it?
Yeah.
Ah, well, there you go.
Oh, no, that was Show Me the Money. Oh, rats, I got it wrong. Anyway, nearly. 8 after 11. 0345 6060 973. Keep your language friendly, even if you are going to be rude on Twitter. Not to me. Adam is in Rochester. Adam, what have you got?
Oh, hello, James. First-time caller, a bit nervous, quite excited.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. I listen to your show all the time.
Good man.
You are the antidote to the Brexit lies.
No. I need reasons to be cheerful.
Okay, right. This is my reason to be cheerful. I work in countryside access, dealing with public rights of way, so footpaths are out in the countryside, etc.
Yes.
When naughty farmers don't reinstate their public rights of way after they've ploughed over them, I step in and then use enforcement by saying, look, if you don't reinstate your public right of way, then you're going to lose 3% of your common agricultural policy money. So this is part of the EU subsidies to landowners so that they have set aside land for wildlife, etc. So the fabulous Michael Gove has recently given a speech basically saying that in future landowners, instead of just being given this money willy-nilly, i.e. like Saudi racehorse breeders or Her Majesty the Queen.
Yes, or James Dyson.
Yeah, or the lovely James Dyson, yeah. Instead of just getting the money automatically, they'll actually have to do more to work for the money. So...
And I, you know, everyone who's still screaming at me for suggesting that I don't think Jeremy Corbyn would necessarily be a brilliant Prime Minister is now going to scream ever louder when I say I can't get rid of my soft spot for some elements of what Michael Gove does, because he actually tries to do stuff rather than just manage decline. The problem with what you've told me is, are we 100% sure we couldn't have done this while we were still in the European Union? Because I read one editorial that said this is a great move, but don't pretend that we couldn't have done it if we'd remained.
I think we probably could have done if there'd been more impetus. And I also think, I hate to say it, but I think that Gove is just words, not deeds.
Oh, hang on, I thought you were ringing up to say this was a good idea. This is Gove's idea.
I'm trying to say I'm trying to come up with a good point. So potentially, what the lovely Mr. Gove has said is that we could have better countryside access for the public, and that money is going towards that, or towards farmers and landowners that encourage that, rather than going to people that have got loads of money anyway and don't really need any more. And that's probably the perhaps a reason to be cheerful, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'll give you that. What do you think is going on the broader stage? He rang in, and he is an MP, but I'm a little uncomfortable hitting him over the head repeatedly now that he's gone. But the mindset of an elected politician who can argue that leaving the largest single market on the planet, the largest single market ever, being the first country in history to sign a free trade agreement that will actually equip us to do less free trade with the other signatories to that treaty, can somehow be alleviated by some slightly over-optimistic analysis of an American trade deal with Australia. I mean, I say this with love of my fellow man. How does someone end up in a hole that deep?
It beggars belief. I mean, I suppose it's kind of like the situation where, you know, you can convince someone, you can present someone with all the facts and counter their arguments, but it's, you know, it's like you said before in other shows, it comes down to emotion almost. And also, perhaps with this chap in Yeovil, he's towing the party line. I mean,
he's not towing the party line, because Ed Vaizey on Channel 5 the other day spoke truth and spoke about there's a complete decline in discipline. There's no discipline in the party. That's why she can't punish anybody for doing things that would have got them fired in any previous cabinet, whether you're talking about Boris Johnson or is that deputy chairman being fired yet? The one who libelled Jeremy Corbyn and had to retract it and apologise in a humiliating fashion? Probably not. So there's it's all gone through the window, and the off-the-record briefings that you now get from almost everybody in the sensible benches is that Theresa May has a choice. She either destroys the country by pressing on with it, or she destroys the party by stopping it.
Absolutely. I mean, I would like to say that I pray every day that Jacob Rees-Mogg comes on your show so you can take him apart for his.
I don't know that I can take him apart. I don't know that I would. I don't know that I could. I spoke to him before the referendum when I was still trying to wear my BBC hat and I was looking for information and not having debates and not having arguments. But he speaks in a way that I don't know. He'll mention something from 1763, and I won't know what it is, and I won't then be able to. So I talked to him about why he's tweeting economic analysis out of the Sun that the Sun have withdrawn, while claiming that the economic analysis of his own government is absolutely bogus. That's all I'd want to know from him. How come you are saying thank you to the Sun for this economic prediction that says we're going to be really, really well off, and then the Sun have to withdraw it from circulation because it's so utterly bovine, ignorant, and wrong, but he still leaves it up there? And how can you be in favour of that demonstrably wrong stuff while dismissing your own government's projections? There's the question that other people can ask him when he pops up.
And this is one of the reasons why I tune in, because you deconstruct the double talk and the double think. You know what you did with the lovely Mr. Farage in that interview, where his guy had to pull him out of the interview. I mean, that was fantastic. It
was a bit pantomime, though, wasn't it, mate? It was an early indication of how pointless it was fighting facts with feelings, because if the feelings run deep enough and they're nasty enough, then the people feeding them can do no wrong. And just, have a look at proper politicians and have a look at pantomime politicians. You've got pantomime politicians now essentially in Poland, in Hungary, in America. Thankfully, we haven't got any in positions of power here, but I tell you what, never say never. Thank you for the kind words. I suppose we now have to put someone on to tell me that I'm absolutely awful in the interest of balance. Atul, how awful am I on a scale of 1 to 10?
7, 8.
Yeah, there we go. That'll do. What do you want to say?
I'm so frustrated, James. I'm normally a listener, not a caller, so...
I am short of time, so fascinating though it is to understand your own personal psychodramas. Give me the reasons to be cheerful about leaving the European Union.
OK, we'll realise what we missed once we've left.
Well, it's not helping. You're doing the Joni Mitchell. We won't know what we've got till it's gone.
Well, I mean, the frustrating thing is... it's like you having a job, and then you're really unhappy with the conditions. You think, it's better in another job. You go there, and then you realise, blimey, I had something much better previously.
Yes.
But what really frustrates me is it was a 52 to 48. Now, the younger generation, when you did the analysis, were more Remain. So in 15 years, for example, we have another referendum, have a huge cost of coming back in. It's absolutely ridiculous.
You know that, and I know that, and I suspect that we now have to, because I'm not getting the calls I used to get from angry people, and that is not because they haven't got the nerve to ring in or anything like that. It's because, as I think Alex in Leon C you can't still be angry. You can't, apart from that one fella, he was still banging on about the left behind and people not being heard. But he began by saying he'd taken a 30 to 40% hit to his own business, and he's turning around to people who can't scrape together 17 million people in this country who can't lay their hands on 100 quid, and he's saying, yeah, they might be bad, they might be worse off economically, but it's worth it because they'll feel listened to. Apart from that level of idiocy, or the claim that an American deal with Australia can somehow replace our membership of the biggest single market in the world, I just want to get into the psychology now. I just want to understand how anybody can listen to Theresa May last week and Donald Tusk this week and still think that the unicorn's going to turn up by tea time.
We have to believe in democracy. The only issue I've got is we should have had the 2/3 majority for us to make a decision like this, which is big.
Yeah. Yeah, I balk at that, but I will only use myself as an example. I'm not casting aspersions on anybody else's qualifications to have cast a vote in that referendum, but I'm casting aspersions on mine. I shouldn't have been allowed near that polling booth until I'd undertaken about 6 months' worth of revision and information. And I have to apologise. You're absolutely right, Ash. Ash has been in touch via Twitter at Mr. James OB to say, how can you say there are no pantomime politicians in the United Kingdom within minutes of giving Boris Johnson a coating on air? You're absolutely right. Oh, no, you're not. It's International Women's Day. I don't think we've had any female voices on the programme yet. So can we rectify that? Can we get rid of a couple of these calls and encourage women to ring in and talk to us about the latest developments regarding Brexit? And I think you can tell today from my tone, from my general demeanour, that I'm casting around now. I genuinely believe that we've set fire to our own home. And now, I think all responsible patriotic people should be trying to minimise the damage. Unfortunately, there are, and this is my interpretation of events, you've still got people standing outside, arsonists, insisting either that the house isn't on fire at all, or that when it's actually burnt down to the ground, it will be magically replaced by a magnificent palace, demonstrably superior to the one that we had before. 22 minutes after 11. That's the line, I think. Demonstrably superior to what we had before. Superior. So when David Davis said exact same benefits, we probably should have smelt a rat. I said, what's the point of doing something so big and costly and divisive if we're going to end up with the exact same benefits that we had before? And now his Prime Minister has conceded that we won't. And Donald Tusk has reluctantly accepted that position because, as he says, I understand why she has to do this at any cost. She has to pretend that it's a good idea. Otherwise, her party falls to pieces. These strike me as inalienable facts. They really do. And when you begin to wonder whether perhaps you've swung too far in that direction, you get a call from a former UKIP member who arranged a fishing-based anti-EU demonstration a couple of years ago, and he calls you up to tell you that he's changed his mind. So, and look, I fully accept lots of people listening will go, oh yeah, I bet he did, it was probably your mate. And you're perfectly entitled to think that, but if you're now shoring up your own political position by imagining that I invite fake callers onto my programme to say fake things, if that's where you've ended up, oh, come on, mate. You really probably should wake up now. It's 24 after 11. Shane's in Fulham. Shane, reasons to be cheerful.
Hello, mate. I apologise for not being a female.
You could have pretended.
Listen, yeah, we do have reasons to be cheerful. I wanted to call in to tell you about back in the days of apartheid in my country, the world decided to cut us off. And we had no one wanted to trade with us. They wanted us to punish the country, but instead of punishing us, it actually gave the country the chance to boost the economy. Local businesses took off like crazy. It's not always international trade, and these globalists are not always good for the economy of the country. I think this will now give local businesses a chance to pick up and to boost the economy. There's more reasons to be cheerful. There's a lot of reasons to be cheerful.
Don't just keep saying that. Tell me how.
Now we know how desperate they are to fish in our waters. we can use this as a bargaining chip. We can say to them,
But the whole referendum was fought on them fishing in our waters. It was all they had. But go on, we'll use that as a bargaining chip. We'll say what?
We'll say, you fish in our waters and we'll take our borders back. Because at the moment, the borders are our number one priority.
Mate, you were telling me about how we'd have an economic recovery that was locally sourced, and now you're talking about borders.
Well,
So tell me about the improvements to our local economy using sanctions-era South Africa as our guide. Crikey, I thought the American-Australian parallel was eccentric. But, OK, so what can we learn from sanctions-era apartheid South Africa?
I'm just taking lessons from history.
I'm taking lessons from you. So how will our economy improve as a result of leaving the European Union, which is what you just told me would happen?
Well, if they don't want to trade, if certain corporations, if multinationals don't want to trade with us, and we have the local means of production, then we can supply and
can we put some flesh on this bone? I mean, the kind of thing you're thinking of. I mean, bearing in mind multinationals, you mean companies rather than countries. But if they decide it's less attractive to trade here or to manufacture here than it would be in the world's largest single market, we can plug that gap and replace those jobs by doing what?
By manufacturing for us, by self-sustaining.
Just only using stuff that we don't have to import.
Exactly.
So what sort of manufacturers do you have in mind, Shane?
Well, Britain's full of good talent.
Well, yes, that's an interesting selection of words, but none of them answer the question I asked. What kind of manufacturing do you envision us being able to lead the world at without importing anything, and that we're not currently doing?
So we're not manufacturing anything. Manufacturers.
The stuff that we're currently doing is irrelevant to your vision. Your vision is of the stuff we're not currently doing, but big multinational companies are, that we'll be able to do on a local basis without importing anything. I'm just wondering what you had in mind.
Well, I don't know, James, but I'm trying to give you reasons to be to be cheerful. Yeah, we're getting our laws back, we're getting our borders back.
No, but we always had our laws, and we always had our borders, and we always had our.
Never.
Well, okay. Well, as I said, I'm not going to have old hackneyed arguments about empty slogans today. I'm talking specifically about the economic impact of this political decision, which you say will have positives, and I'm very politely pointing out that so far you've been unable to name a single one. It might not, James, but it might do. I can't tell the future, and neither can you, but I don't think there's any reason to be pessimistic here. I think it's... Well, hang on. Theresa May and Donald Tusk have both said that the economic impact will be negative. The government's own modelling has, in some areas, 4 times the negative impact of the last recession, largely in the poor areas that voted leave. So I appreciate that economic impact assessments aren't crystal balls by any stretch of the imagination, but your reason to be cheerful is that we will be able to replace what is currently done on the international stage with local manufacturing. And I was just hoping you'd say something like bicycles. Well, James, I did say to you that Britain's full of talent. And I might not need to name them individually, but there's a lot of talent in Britain. There's a lot. This is it. And of course, not only bicycles. The point you miss, of course, is that you're supposed to be explaining to me how leaving the European Union would increase the amount of talent in Britain. Well, James, I'm just trying to tell you that there are reasons to be cheerful. It's not. I haven't heard one yet, Shane, and I've promised you I've been listening really closely. Well, South Africa was cut off from the rest of the world, and the economy boomed. Unfortunately, history suggests that the economy didn't boom. Well, but anyway, all right, I'll take that. So the reason to be cheerful is that if we're lucky, we'll be like apartheid-era South Africa while it was suffering from international sanctions. That's our sunny upland. Not at all, not at all. That's exactly what you said. That's not what I said at all. What do you think you said? Being protectionist can sometimes be an advantage to the economy. And which leading British politician has suggested that we should be protectionist as opposed to outward-looking and doing more trade with the rest of the world? Well, leaving the EU is certainly a protectionist move. But all the people that have promoted it have said it will free us up to do more trade with other countries. You heard the Conservative MP talking about Australia a minute ago, closer to your home country than it is to mine. So just to recap, and I'm as I said, no arguments, no shouting today. You think that we should look at apartheid-era South Africa as a reason to be optimistic about leaving the European Union, and you think that we can replace a lot of what is currently done on the international manufacturing stage in this country with locally sourced manufacturing. But at the moment, and I appreciate it's a pressured environment when you ring a radio station, at the moment you can't think of a single example of what kind of sector that might involve.
Well, all the doom and gloom is not always, it doesn't always turn out so bad. Protectionism can sometimes have advantages for the economy. I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, now you're just repeating yourself. So we'll agree that that's what you've said. Look to apartheid-era South Africa as a shining example of what we could hope for in our best-case scenarios, and we'll be okay because of manufacturing, although I can't think of a single example of what we might manufacture more effectively than we currently could.
Learn lessons from history.
Yes. So in history, can you think from history of an example of anyone ever signing a free trade agreement that reduces the amount of free trade they can do with their co-signatories?
Well, as it stands right now, we're taking the borders back. We're taking our laws back.
But now you're just being a parody of a sort of Brexit half-wit. You're just saying words.
We don't know what's going to happen with the economy.
But mate, the question was simple. You said learn lessons from history, so I asked you to refer me to a free trade agreement signed by signatories who would be free to do less trade than before.
No, James, I'm not a politician. You're
not a politician, you're not a historian, you can't see the future, you can't answer any of my questions, but you think that we should look to apartheid-era South Africa. Just high five, Shane. Seriously, as not for the first time, we attempt to find out what will be better than it is now. And the answer is nothing. So why are we doing it? Julie is in Frankfurt. Happy International Women's Day, Julie.
Well, thank you so much.
And you are an international woman. How very apt. It's fantastic. What do you want to say?
I've lived and worked in the EU for many, many years. I was at the Nouvelle Sorbonne in 1974, where I met Emma Thompson. I've worked since 1999 as a head of 5 international schools. I have a little insight into what goes on in living and working in the EU.
Well, so do we.
Yes, we do indeed. But are you aware that in the EU, in every
we are still. I've lived pretty much my entire life in the EU.
Well, I believe it's in the United Kingdom.
Which is in the European Union, Julie.
Well, fair enough. So I've lived in
Crikey, what sort of schools did you teach in?
Are we splitting hairs now, or are we having
on whether or not the United Kingdom is in the European Union? No, we're not. We're splitting hairs. I don't understand. You're sort of claiming you've got a special perspective because you live in the European Union.
Yes, I do, because I know
but so do I.
Do you really? So you know what happens in Switzerland, Italy, Germany, France. Every time you move round, exactly what you have to do.
I have visited all of those countries. I have visited all of those countries.
The last few
West
years
London.
have pontificated on just about everything outside your sphere.
What's the right answer? Yes or no?
Well, do you know what happens if you move to a European country to live and work?
Yes.
Okay, tell me what happens.
Well, you start off in one country, and then you move to the other one, and then you live and work there.
Oh,
under freedom of movement. Under freedom of.
Do you understand about registration?
Well, the rules are different from country to country.
No, it isn't necessarily different.
But it is.
Different.
Yes.
But in France, Italy and Germany, there's a different process.
Well, precisely. That's what I meant by different.
People, do listen for a change, James. Listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
5 minutes ago, you were under the impression that the United Kingdom wasn't in the European Union, Headmistress.
No, I wasn't at all.
You called it splitting hairs.
Not at all.
No, okay, let's start again.
You're pathetic now.
Yeah, you're right. I apologise.
You are being pathetic.
I completely agree.
When you get a female caller, you absolutely love that opportunity to just.
You got me. Bang to rights. Because all the male callers that I've had today, we've rolled out the red carpet and tickled them under the chin.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. That South African chap before, I couldn't have been more sycophantic to him if I tried.
Right. Let's get down to facts and stop this silly school playground business going on at the moment.
That's your comfort zone, not mine.
Oh, really? I suggest you listen.
Well,
When
you have to
move
talk.
to a country outside the UK, whether in Europe or Switzerland or Norway,
Switzerland's in
you're
Europe, so is
required
Norway.
to register
They're both in
as
Europe.
a local authority, which means they know who you are, where you are, and exactly what you're doing in the country. In England or in the United Kingdom, you're not required to do that.
So it's a British government rule rather than a European Union rule.
That's the point I'm trying to
It's a British
make.
government decision not to properly...
Calm down a little bit and stop being a chicken little. And just listen to people who know what they're talking about.
Do you know what?
And who
I'm
might
going
learn
to. I'm going to listen to people that know what they're talking about. I'm not sure you're one of them, but I'm going to be quiet for 2 minutes now and just let you speak. Go.
I've lived in Europe since 1999.
So have I.
I suggest I know far more about what's going on in Europe than you do.
But I've lived in Europe since 1972.
Oh, bless your little heart. And I've lived in it since 1956.
Fantastic.
And I remember the ERM collapse. And I remember all the pre-1975 politicians and everything that was going on then.
Yes,
I
I bow to your knowledge of the politicians and everything that was going on then.
Because you weren't born, and you are really a very arrogant little man.
I'm 6'1".
Oh, well, I'm 5'6". Take me on.
Well, at what, Julie? Uno?
Whatever
Chess?
you like.
Julie, I bear you no malice. I bear you no ill will, but I am gonna stop you from embarrassing yourself further with the greatest of affection and regret. I've got no idea why you rang me. No idea at all. We tire ourselves out explaining how immigration rules were a Westminster decision rather than a European Union imposition. I don't know why you're in such a foul mood. If it's anything to do with me, I apologise, and I hope your day is on the up from this moment onwards. And happy International Women's Day. Matthew is in High Wycombe. Matthew, what have you got?
James, well, first of all, I'm South African, hopefully soon to be a British citizen, and I'd like to apologise for the idiot who called in earlier.
No, we don't need to call him an idiot, and you don't need to apologise for him any more than I need to take personal responsibility for Julie's contribution to the programme. We're individuals and we are together. What do you want to say?
Well, just touching on what he said before, though, he's completely wrong. Not even just from apartheid in the 80s was doing okay. I dealt with manufacturers who lived through that, and the only ones who made money were the people who were helping the racists cut corners, get around the laws. So it was a disaster for the country. Anyway, moving on. Positives, I think that there's a good chance that the right wing in the country is going to screw up Brexit so far that they will discredit themselves for a generation, and maybe there'll be a left-wing government that'll start making some good decisions for the country.
Maybe there'll be a left-wing government and they'll make some bad decisions.
No, I agree, but I think hopefully the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson will be completely discredited, although they both seem to be made out of Teflon.
And of course, they're both. Rees-Mogg's dad was an editor of the Times. Boris Johnson is still writing for the Telegraph. You only really get your comeuppance in this country if the press barons decide that you deserve it, and I can't see that happening with these guys. But give me something to be upbeat about if you can.
Sure. Well, I do think the people who work in refrigeration of fresh fruit and vegetables will be doing quite well out of Brexit. Someone's going to need to make sure the fruit doesn't go off, so there's a silver lining somewhere.
No, you're being sarcastic, Matthew.
Yeah, indeed. I've heard it's a British trait. So
it is a British trait, and you're adopting it very well. I've got mates in the greengrocer business, and one of the... that's why the tariff-free element of what Donald Tusk said yesterday was better in some elements than what some people have hoped for. But under the government's own economic analysis, it's going to be an 8% impact in parts of the north of England because, well, you know why. All of these things.
James, I'm stealing a bit of your time, but very, very quickly, I worked in shipping for a year before the stress almost killed me in South Africa. And basically, I made a bit of a boo-boo on something that gotten stuck. It was 40 tons of apples. And it sat for an extra week. It shouldn't have. But what that meant was that the price of the whole container went down by half.
Wow.
Which meant that the people who shipped it to the UK had just lost money completely. It was a dead loss. They they were out by 60 grand local. Now, it'll be the worse for berries or worse for cherries or whatever it is that you make in the UK and are shipping, say, to France. So there'll be some farmers and some suppliers of fruit who will be absolutely terrified right now. You can't just say, oh, well, extra 3 days, we'll ship it to America, it's going to be fine. It's not. It's just not like that with fresh goods. Maybe with meat and fish, it's a little bit different.
How bad will the border checks be? Because tariff-free is good, but point of origin customs checks might not be quite as stringent as you suggest.
I don't know, but what I'm saying is if you have lettuce and previously you flogged it to France.
Yes.
I mean, I know, you do it, I do. We look at the milk and we go, oh, three days to go. I'll have the one that's going to last me 5 days. And
sure.
It's the same with lettuce. And people get charged for stuff sometimes that isn't sold as well. People who supply into supermarkets, that's not known a lot. That, you know, if not all of your goods are sold, sometimes the supermarket just doesn't pay you for what goes off. It's a common trick. So there are probably some very, very scared farmers and people in the food business right now. Can't say anything about it, of course, but...
well, the farmers are beginning to, actually. They're in the same way that the fishermen of Grimsby have sent a delegation to Westminster asking if they can continue their trading agreements and arrangements with the European Union. But, of course, the European Union turn around, as Donald Tusk did yesterday, and say, yeah, of course you can, as long as we can continue our fishing arrangements in British coastal waters. And that seems to be the kind of walnut that no one can crack.
Well, now the wheels are really hitting the road. The thing is, no one who's actually got skin in the game in, say, fish or fresh fruit or whatever is feeling cheerful. They might be brave and say, well, we'll make a hash of it. But it's the people who are in industries where the money can just hop the border, no problem. You know, we can I know, and we can do this and we can manufacture that, and your compatriot confident that we can ape all the benefits of apartheid-era South Africa when you had a sort of racially selective oligarchy in that country, not an economy that bears any comparison with a free liberal democracy. A lot of you have wondered about poor old Linda, who rang us the other day as we were talking about noisy neighbours. There are wheels turning. One listener has galloped to her rescue. We're keeping a very close eye on things. Things haven't improved as much as we hoped they might have done by now, but there are wheels turning and we're doing our best to help her. I know that you had a very big response to that call, and I'm not surprised because I was trying not to giggle when the noise started. She rang in to tell me how noisy her neighbours were, and I thought she was probably exaggerating slightly. And then the drilling started, and it was genuinely like having someone in here with a full-on pneumatic. And then that initial sort of 2 or 3 seconds, you know, when it's half laughing, half shock. And then after that, luckily I didn't. This is outrageous. So I said to myself on the radio while talking to Linda, this isn't funny. It was awful. And hopefully we'll be able to help her come to some sort of improvement on that. I'm not sure there's any help at all for Julie in Frankfurt, but thank you for all your kind words about that call. Let's go to Copenhagen next. Wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen. Anton is there. Anton, what would you like to say?
Oh, well, that was faster than I thought. Okay, well, I don't really I don't believe in what I'm going to say, but I'm hoping you can help me. That South African guy inspired me a little bit.
Which one?
I think what he was the guy that said that protectionism was maybe a good thing.
Okay.
So maybe what he's trying to say is that if we come out of I'm in Denmark now, but I'm from Norfolk. If we come out of the EU, then perhaps all these, small businesses like you hear on Clive Bull's business hour on Mondays and on Dragon's Den, maybe all of these small companies will be able to, that are manufacturing in the UK, will be able to sell to the internal market, and there'll be a bigger market for them. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Mars bars, there'll be a demand for normal-sized Mars bars again, so they'll have to open factories in the UK to cater for the UK market.
I'm not sure you're taking this... Are you taking this entirely seriously?
Well, I mean, I hope you would help me a little bit.
Well, okay. I mean, I think...
I'm trying.
I know you are. It's stuff that you can't currently do. So we could make toasters but then we wouldn't be able to export. I guess you're talking about people who actively don't want foreign markets, who will be able to...
Not that they don't want them, but maybe just small domestic...
so we can cut our cloth according to... The problem with that is that if we are to look at the detail of what May and Tusk have said in the last week, I don't know that we'd be able to... I suppose we can manufacture stuff here that doesn't meet EU regulations as long as we don't try and export it.
Exactly.
Okay. most of the EU regulations are, when you look at them, and there's probably too many of them. No one is arguing that they're flipping infallible, but certainly when I swatted up on the Hoovers, that lots of people got very worked up about for reasons that they always struggle to explain. Yada yada. When I looked that up, the reason behind it was actually to improve the air that we breathe, the environment, and obviously the consumption of energy without having any noticeable impact on the suction powers of your vacuum cleaner. So I mean, Hoovers would most obviously fit some of the parameters you've set, but I can't think of anything else.
We could have a global market for super powerful vacuum cleaners. I mean, there must be a demand for that out there.
Yeah, except we wouldn't be able to sell them to the largest single market on the planet.
Oh well.
And I think the Mars factory, the mythical Mars factory of your dreams, would probably be in Holland, like HP Sources now.
But can I just say one thing now?
Anything.
On my normal hat.
Yes.
I'm in the EU. I've lived half my life in the EU. Well, more than half my life in the EU. I've been in Denmark now for 17 years.
Yes.
And
so have I. I'm not going to do this again.
But I'm a Brit, and whenever I hear people saying the EU are doing this and the EU doing that, I get quite offended because that's us. That's just people representing us. That's not a Donald Tusk or a Juncker or whoever it is. That is just people saying, and when they say, oh, they sell far more to us than we sell to, yeah, but that's collectively.
Yes, I know.
Individual countries that it's not a Donald Tusk or a Juncker or whoever they're called. Why do you always get nervous when you do that? That's one for Mystery Hour. But it's like well, you just. I'll tell you what happened then when you gulped. You just remembered that there are a million people tuning into this program every week. Yeah. but
plus people in Denmark. You don't get counted. Yes, I know this, but this is the thing psychologically, and we'll do this another day. I thought we might do it today. The psychology is one of enmity, and that's what I think people like you and me can't quite understand, is that if you see the European Union as an enemy that wishes you harm, then you can understand how people were persuaded into voting against it without really knowing much. And then as evidence emerges after you've done that actually they're not an enemy to their members, they're an incredibly effective protector of their members' interests, then you can't quite square that. Do you see what I mean? But this is the post-war thing that I don't want to be dismissive of or say bad things about, because one prominent Eurosceptic who I know very well lost his father in the Second World War, and I believe that his politics have been informed by that experience ever since. And so it's all very well for me at 46 to turn around and say, oh, get over it. But if you perceive it as an enemy, and then all of this journalism that's been put into proving that it's an enemy, that's why people on Question Time end up talking about bananas, because they can't actually come up with any evidence that it's an enemy or that it's a negative influence on their lives. Immigration, I suppose, is the easiest thing to pretend has negatively impacted on people's lives. But I don't see it as an enemy, so I can never get inside that mindset. And I suspect that you in Copenhagen can't either. Georgie's in Battersea with the final attempt at a silver lining. Georgie, what's it going to be?
Hi. It's a slightly melancholy reason to be cheerful. So I'm 23 years old. I've recently graduated from uni.
Yes.
I was actually a politics student. That I've honestly always avoided UK government politics because I find it so boring and so repetitive.
Yes.
But actually, for me, I think that Brexit, it was almost a warning sign, not all was well in the UK.
Yes.
There's so much inequality. So many people are really quite annoyed and fed up with the way that things are. And I think that the UK government can use the tragedy of Brexit to actually address the inequalities and the neglect.
Well, I think a Labour government would try to. I shall offer that olive branch to all my infuriated Corbyn listeners, Corbyn fan listeners.
Obviously, it's going to be a lot harder outside of the EU because of restricted economic growth, all of the sad things that everyone's talking about.
Except
but also,
Marcus
I think
Fish.
that it's quite nice because it's actually almost there's so much more political engagement. It's getting younger people into politics, like the Our Future, Our Choice.
It is, and it is a silver lining of sorts. You can tell by the music in the background that we're heading towards the end of the hour. But of course, the people you describe as being dispossessed, left out, left behind, the people with the least, the people who are poorest are under every assessment, and I accept they might all be wrong, but under every single assessment, they're the people that are going to be hit the hardest. People that are going to be hit the lightest, Londoners.